bit of study here. I'm in charge. Okay. I'm in charge. There we go. So, Carmen, I'm going to give you credit for this because some time ago, Carmen said, we have a very interesting and mixed congregation, people from different backgrounds. So, why don't we have something where we discuss Jews who are not traditional Ashkenazic or Sephardic Jews by origin? It's very good. So, I spoke with Dr. Taylor also, and we're trying to make some connection with an organization that represents Jews of color and maybe also Hispanic Jews. I'm waiting to get back from them. Maybe we'll tie it in with Black History Month in February. I'm going to see. Also, Carmen gave me an idea for a very interesting discussion topic. And Richard Hirschhout from the American Jewish Committee is going to help us pull that off. We're going to see how it works out. But now I want to talk about something good, actually. Talk about something good, which is unknown tidbits about the intersectionality of Jews and blacks in America. And I want to talk about good things. I don't want to talk about how wonderful we were for blacks. I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to get into that. I want to talk about how our two groups actually, ethnic groups, merged in good ways in American history. So, very appropriate, the Torah reading this week, Va'era, and we have in chapter 9, it has the famous phrase, Shlach et ami ve'avduni, let my people go that they shall serve me. We all recognize that phrase, let my people go. It became incorporated into a spiritual. It had its roots in the struggle of black slaves to be free from their chains. And it was this presentation by Moses to Pharaoh, let my people go, was made part of the introduction between my professor, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whose memory we honor this weekend, where in his introduction to the Reverend, he says, at the first conference on religion and race, the main participants were Pharaoh and Moses, right? That conference, Moses' words were, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go that they may celebrate a feast to me. Very important connection. Now, relations between Jews and blacks have been mixed, especially in recent years, from a Louis Farrakhan or a Kanye West. There was a little bit of Reverend Sharpton messing things up 2 decades ago, also leading to a riot. I think he's tried to straighten out this connection since then, but some of it stems from influence of the first Christians to preach to their slaves way back and teaching them the Christ killer narrative. It was part of the teachings that were given to African Americans, right? They were raised in the Christian churches. On the other hand, and as the words of the song, Let My People Go, tell us, there was also an identification with ancient Israel. So there was a mixed message to them. Ancient Israel and the Jews are Christ killers. Mixed message being given to these people. And there was also, we want to consider a lot of mixing that took place over the centuries since the Europeans came into the Americas. I mean, an example is Alexander Hamilton, one of the great framers of the Constitution, and it is now presumed that he was of mixed African and Jewish heritage. A few years back, we also had a session that Carmen helped us set it up with us, online session, Zoom session with members of the Jewish community from Jamaica. It's America adjacent, right? Can't go too far from America to get to Jamaica. A mixed community, Jews of Sephardic and African ancestry. So I thought here, just a reminder, if some of you may remember it, here's Avinu Malkeinu with a decidedly Caribbean beat, just a short section. There we go. Okay, so I see it's a mixed congregation. Everybody's very comfortable. Right? And that's some of the heritage coming out of the Caribbean. You go back, one of the founders of the very influential Black Civil Rights Movement, SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, was Julius Lester. And he converted to Judaism. And he was influenced by the fact that he had a Jewish great-great-grandfather who had married a freed slave. Also, I remember my sociology professor, Sociology 101, back in the 60s, pointed out that then the predominant mixed race marriages were between Jews and blacks. And so, as I mentioned later, we want to have some presentation coming from people who come from outside what we may call the standard image of Jews, as an example of that. And the idea of opening ourselves up to a broader community potentially. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's much more, much more common than than we recognize. So this Shabbat, I want to talk about intersectionality, but it's a politically loaded word. I want to talk in a positive sense, connections between our two groups. So we'll talk about music. Now, everybody knows about Jewish involvement in jazz. Everybody knows about that end. Gershwin introduced Jewish musical themes into a musical about blacks, Porgy Bess. Al Jolson pretended to be a Negro in blackface. This was done a century ago, right? But what about the other way around? How about the involvement of African Americans in Jewish music? The other way. Oh, look at this. Tevye, der Schwarze Hasen. Tevye, the Black Cantor. Story of Thomas LaRue Jones, Black Cantor from Newark, captivated the Jewish world with his songs. Article by Edna Nachshon, the Tablet magazine, and just an excerpt here. Here is his poster. Let me pull it up here. Der größte Wunder von der Welt, the greatest wonder of the world, der berühmte Schwarze Hasen, the famous Black Cantor, welcher hat aufgestürmt. He took over America by storm. And compositions from Jewish folklore and famous cantors. Tevye, der Schwarze Hasen in Yiddish, Thomas LaRue in English, the most phenomenal cantor tenor in America, only one of his kind in the world. So the writer says, I was working my way through, and this was sort of unknown. It was like it was rediscovered only recently. Working my way through a mass of colorful theater posters that featured Yiddish divas and matinee idols, I glimpsed an old black and white illustrated placard, cameo-like portrait of a serious-looking young man, black man with soulful eyes, dressed in festive cantorial regalia. Tevye, the Schwarze Hasen, the Black Cantor. He was, with this print set, the greatest wonder of the world. Right? Thomas LaRue, a phenomenon, the only one of his kind, right? And taken America by storm. Okay, so that was from her article. Then, so here's a little bit of introduction about him. This is, I think, through YIVO. YIVO is a great institute for study of Yiddish literature and lore. I think it's for them. I'll put this on for you.
Thomas LaRue Jones, from 1894 to 1954. On the one hand, a portrait of him emerges from the interviews he gave for the various newspapers, both mainstream papers, Yiddish and African American. So, for example, on the left, in an April 8th, 1922 column in the African American newspaper, The New York Age, columnist Lucien H. White introduces his readers to LaRue as a young Negro born 20 years ago whose mother accepted the religious beliefs of the Hebrews and raised up her son in that way. He quotes LaRue, "It began with my mother. She lived in Newark where she found race prejudice to be very strong. She could make friends only with Jewish women, preferring the company of Jews to Christians." White notes that LaRue's mother insisted he receive a traditional Jewish primary education, along with his sister in a Talmud Torah, and that he and his sister should also be able to pray from both a siddur and a machzer. On the other hand, other columns about Leroux give a wildly different lineage. So, for example, this article from the Grodner Moment in Grodner, Poland, it claims that he was born in the town of Erset in Abyssinia. His father, named Petrosi, was a very cultured man with a high position in the local government, while his mother, Alia, died when he was young. His father wanted him to become a fully realized Jew, so sent him to a Russian Jew in Newark, where, at the rabbi's home, he stayed and until he was 14 years old, had a religious upbringing and learned many languages.
Yeah, you can see his background was one thing to the press, one thing to the other press, but what was interesting, in Poland, he was a hit. In Poland, the heartland of Yiddish, he was a hit. He came across the real thing. And this is available on Yivo. If you want to look the whole thing up, it's Lost World of African Cantors, a whole discussion about many different figures in this realm. But what they assume is he grew up in a Jewish neighborhood, and it was much more comfortable with the Jews in the neighborhood than with other people, and just identified as such. And I've seen that. I've seen a member of my previous congregation who African American, became Jewish, and he said, why? Because he grew up in a Jewish neighborhood in Brooklyn. It was Yemenite Jews, and they were all darker skin a little bit anyway, and he would hang around with them, and he learned everything from them. And they said, well, you're hanging around with us, why don't you become one of us? And he actually went through conversion. And I would call him up for the Torah reading, and he would recite it with the correct Yemenite pronunciation for the blessings. Later on, I bumped into him, become a Chabadnik. So that's not the only African-American Chabadnik that I've met. So now, music. And this is very interesting because his selection, this one piece that they found.
Or a comic vaudeville song in order to show off.
Hold on. Yeah, let me enlarge this. He's going to explain why I picked this song. It is a song about Jewish suffering. And he picked that one as his sample piece to highlight himself. And I guess, is it because he's fully identified himself as Jewish? This is the 1920s, I believe, 1920s. So there were pogroms, but there's no Holocaust going on yet. But the Jews in Poland very oppressed, and he's identifying with it. So this from Shalom Sekunda. Shalom Sekunda, great Jewish composer, by Mir Bistushain. Also remember On a Wagon Bound for a Market. That was big in the 60s. The Beatles put it out on their label, one of their labels, and that was his composition, Shalom Sekunda. So this is composition from Shalom Sekunda that cantor Thomas Leroux, the Schwarze Tevye, is going to sing.
His accurate, elegant Yiddish. Instead, he chooses a song which reinforced the historic bond between God and the Jews.
Read the words.
We're going to take a listen to this song, Verlier nicht deine Hoffnung, Rebit.
Der Jid wird kein Mul mit Werden verloren, bis am bei dem Jahr wird sich mehren, in welcher Sach den Himmel die Sterne, in wo ist geworden, in dem Jid hat der Goya der Scheune macht im Pogromen sein Blut halten fließen, fing wie in Stromen. Man verbessert sein Leben als Schreck. In der Rot bei ihm alles weg. Der Scheune dahin, hat sein Kind, in hofft auf ein Nest.
Goes on. But you can see his voice, beautiful voice, fine Yiddish, a reine flower Yiddish, yeah. But this poem from Shalom Secunda, very powerful, right? This is God promised us that we would be multiplied, and yet look, we've been attacked and attacked and attacked. It says, don't give up hope yet, Mr. Jew. It will all work out. Pharaoh, Haman, and Amalek. And the Israelis are accused. Why are they comparing Hamas to Amalek? That means they're going to wipe out all the Palestinians. That's the accusation. Here is an African American Jew identifying as a Jew. Remember Amalek. Don't forget what happened to Amalek. And then you'll be brought with pride to save it into the land of the Star of David, right? Of the Zionists. Don't give up hope yet, Mr. Jew. Oh, okay. Again, that's on Yivo. Lost World of the African American Cantors, 1915 to 1953. Beautiful material by Yivo. If you're ever looking up for information on European Jews, American Jews, great source. So now, get back to my story. So that he sings about Jew, don't give up, about coming back to the land of David. So it brings us to African Zionism. South Africa today is the country leading the attack against Israel, and it's been part of a historical trend in South Africa of the past several decades. And Nelson Mandela sympathized with the Palestinians, but also have to remember he also sympathized with Israel, right? The current government does not. The last 2 decades, they led this terrible conference in Durban, South Africa, that justified attacks on Jews in Israel, basically. So it ignores not only the role that Israel played in support given to the newly emergent nations of Africa after colonialism. Was Israel one of the first people to recognize these newly liberated countries and actually send assistance? But it's also the inspiration that Jewish history gave to prominent leaders of the early civil rights movement. So we talk about Zionism. Here's from an article on Zionism, Pan-Africanism, and White Nationalism by Professor Shaul Magid. Now he's trying to say, Pan-Africanism and white nationalism have some things in common, but I don't want to get into that. I don't go into the weeds with him. But here's the key point. Black Zionism had its roots before the formal advent of Zionism, political Zionism of Herzl, in the Pan-African writings of William Blyden and Martin Delany, and then later W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey and Stokely Carmichael. So Carmichael, it was the head of SNCC, I think, was it? I'm trying to get my connections, West Indian-born Edward Blyden wrote about it as a resolution to the slavery question in the 1850s, focusing on the newly founded country of Liberia in 1847. Blyden had no particular ideology of Black nationalism, viewed colonizing Liberia in a way proto-Zionists in the 19th century viewed Jewish immigration to Palestine as return to the homeland. Although Blyden did not have the messianic fervor some of the proto-Zionists or Pan-Africanists had. Blyden published The Jewish Question, interesting title. It's a purely 19th century problem that leads itself to the Nazi answer to the Jewish question. It's a pamphlet in 1898, was underwritten by his Jewish friend from Liverpool, Louis Solomon. It was 2 years after the publication of Herzl. So Blyden has been active in this for many decades already. And he admired Hitler's publication, Der Judenstaat, the Jewish state, in 1903. Just before Hitler died, Blyden lectured on West African problems using a biblical metaphor, the idea that the Black colonization of Africa gives to Africans the fullest opportunity for self-development and self-advancement, right? Looking at what the Zionists were trying to achieve. Blyden viewed Zionism as a model for his idea, coining the term Ethiopianism and calling on Blacks to return to Africa to redeem it. Right? Ethiopia being an example of a historic, independent African nation that was not conquered, not colonized. So, and it's a symbol of liberty. In The Jewish Question, Blyden writes, the Jewish question in some respects similar to that which at this moment agitates thousands of descendants of Africa and America, anxious to return to the lands of their fathers. So making a strong parallel, our two histories. The idea reached a wider audience in W.E.B. Du Bois, who coined the term Black Zionism to describe his Pan-Africanism. And Du Bois openly said, the African movement must mean to us what the Zionist movement must mean to the Jews, the centralization of race effort and recognition of a racial front. Du Bois, an ardent fan of Zionism, pinpointed the racial component of Zionism in a way that many overlooked. I'd like to mention also, Du Bois went to Germany as a doctoral student. In Germany, he was received well as a black, like 19, before World War I think. He was received well as an African American, but he saw the Jews were rejected as much as they were German, and he couldn't quite put the two together. He could understand the rejection in America as a black, but in Europe, the blackness was not the problem, the Jewness was the problem. And that was what caused them to think about this connection. So one of the best defenses of Israel's right to defend itself was given in a speech by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. just a short time before he was assassinated, and I was there at that speech. And then we have this movie that just came out now, Rustin, about Bayard Rustin. It failed to cover Bayard Rustin's battles on behalf of Israel. When he and A. Philip Randolph, I think A. Philip Randolph was the man who unionized the train, what do we call that? The people who serve the commuters on the train. Conductor, there we go, the conductors union. I think that was where he started it. So they founded together Black Americans to Support Israel Committee, BASIC, and he declared, since Israel's democratic states surrounded by essentially undemocratic states, which have sworn her destruction, those interested in democracy everywhere must support Israel's existence. I have to say, there's been, I don't know if it's intentional or unintentional, an erasure of the connection between blacks and Jews. So in the film Selma, Heschel was sort of erased out of the story, even though he was the right-hand man too, along with Bayard Rustin there and several others. And this Rustin defending the Jewish people in the state of Israel, not mentioned at all. Right. As a former communist and openly gay, he would have been shocked by the devotion of so many in the LGBTQ community to the cause of Hamas, and by many in the Black Lives Matter movement to the cause of Hamas. He would have been shocked. How about African Americans who felt they were the original Jews? Many years back, as a rabbinical student, I went to on Shabbat to a synagogue in Harlem. It was the Ethiopian Hebrew congregation led by Rabbi Matthews. It was a very interesting service. It was, you know, we say a mix of Hebrew, English, Black American, you know, where you sing and you have a repeat and back and forth music. So there was an article I found here, Harlem World Magazine, Black Jews, the Commandment Keepers in Harlem in 1910. And here's a picture going to the founding of this congregation in 1910. Black Jews started forming Harlem congregation in the 1910s based on the conviction that Africans were descended from ancient Hebrews. That Christianity was a religion imposed on them during enslavement in America, but few traces of their presence remain in the neighborhood. So this is talking about a filmmaker, Marlene Glicksman. Her film in progress called The Commandment Keepers will be screened on April 17th. I'm not sure if that's this year or if this is a few years back. 92nd Street Y in Manhattan. It traces the congregation's history from the early Black rabbis' sermons and writings about their commitment to Jewish rituals, the followers' persistence in the face of racism and anti-Semitism. And I have to say also, you know, about being accepted in the Jewish community. Gradually, they have become absorbed. They're in the process of being absorbed in the Jewish community. So this was Rabbi Matthews, Reverend Matthews, Rabbi Matthews, holding a Sefer Torah. And this is the founder, Wentworth Arthur Matthew. And I founded Commandment Keepers Congregation, Harlem, 1919. Influenced by non-Black Jews he met, as well as by Marcus Garvey and the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League. Used biblical Jews in exile as a metaphor for Black people in North America. One of the accomplishments of Garvey's movement was to strengthen the connection between Black Americans and Africa, Ethiopia in particular. When Matthews later learned about the Beta Israel, the Ethiopian Jews, he identified with them. Today, Commandment Keepers follow traditional Jewish practice and observe Jewish holidays. Members observe kashrut, circumcised newborn boys, celebrate bar and bat mitzvahs. Synagogue has a mechitza to separate men and women during worship. They believe they are descendants of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Matthew taught the Black man is a Jew and all genuine Jews are Black men, but he valued non-Black Jews as those who have preserved Judaism over the centuries. He maintained cordial ties with non-Black Jewish leaders in New York, subsequently invited them to worship in his synagogue. He was getting involved, and I think his children were getting increasingly involved in the mainstream Jewish community, sort of merging in. Some years back, I was a rabbi in Newport News, Virginia, and across the James River was the city of Portsmouth. And I was told that there had been a community of Black Jews there. At one time, when I was driving through the countryside, I saw what looked like an abandoned church that had a very visible Magen David in the window. I could not determine if that was their synagogue. However, I did find some reference to them online. One particular famous Rabbi Capers Sifoniya Jr., spiritual leader of Beth Shalom B'nai Zaken Ethiopian Hebrew congregation in Chicago, first cousin of former First Lady Michelle Obama, born in Georgetown, South Carolina, but his family moved to Portsmouth when he was a child. So he was growing up there in Portsmouth, attended IC Norcom High School and Norfolk State University before joining the Israelite community. Also, it's not well known, but President Obama has a Jewish half brother, because his father had married a second time to a Jewish woman. That son identified as a Jew. Interesting aside, nobody knows about it, but that's Louis Lucas, state senator, civil rights activist in Virginia, also member of the Links, Portsmouth chapter of the National Organization of Black Women Committed to Civic and Cultural Engagement, identifies as Black Hebrew Israelite, follows dietary laws of the Torah. And Michael Twitty, culinary historian, James Beard Award-winning author, known for his work on exploring African roots of Southern food and culture. Black Jewish convert, practices conservative Judaism, born in Washington, D.C., traced his ancestry to enslaved Africans who lived in Portsmouth and other parts of Virginia. So, okay. I'm almost finished here. As I pointed out, we have our very important intersectionality between our communities, whether it be Jews who are descended from ancient communities of Ethiopia, like our two young technical crew guys, or Jews who came from more recent Jewish heritage, or Jews that themselves chose to formally join Judaism, whatever the original ethnicity or religion. And I say, welcome aboard. Everybody's welcome. If you want to be part of the Jewish people, all the troubles that we have, and you want to join in, you're welcome to come in. I wish everybody Shabbat Shalom, everything good to all of you. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, you have more names? Oh, okay, because I announced. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So yeah. Yeah. So we have all of them in our hearts and minds. You want to recite Kaddish in their memory? Please do. So go ahead. Kaddish is found on page 500 and 512, 514. Hold on. 512. Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead. You got that. Go ahead. Amen. Good day. חיי זכור בית ישראל בעגלה בזמן קריב. אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם למאה בעיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתעלה יתעלה שמי בקדושה בריחו לעילה מכל ברכתה ושירתה תשבחתה ונחמתה לאמירם בעלמא במרו. אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה בחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. רומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו amen. Amen. Next week we're going to mark Tu B'Shvat. So I'd like to make it a fruity Tootie Shabbat. So please, just everybody, bring a bag of your favorite dried fruits or nuts or something appropriate for Tu B'Shvat. I hope nobody has any nut allergies. That's the only thing I want to be careful for. And so we will, and then I'll put up something, a little bit, exactly, a little bit happy for us for Tu B'Shvat. I will be away the following week. Dr. Norman will cover for me, and I'll be back then after that. So to all of us, Shabbat Shalom, everything good? Shabbat Shalom. And maybe by then we'll be in the chapel. They're working on it. So we're hopeful. Next week, from your mouth to the contractor's ears.